This is everything I know about Mirage, from in-depth macro strategy down to the specifics of how to play out every single position on both T and CT side. I've watched and played a lot of Mirage over the years, and I've listened to the thoughts of some of the best in the game. So you probably won't be able to find a more in-depth video about Mirage than this one. By the end, I'll have explained everything you need to know to understand and play Mirage at a high level, but I'll also have given you a template for understanding every map in the game. Now, before we begin, this is a Mirage guide. I hope it'll be a great place to start understanding the map at a deeper level, but Counter-Strike is a complicated game, so it's key to understand that there are more ways to play the map than I could possibly go over in a single video. This is about giving you an advanced level of understanding of the map, not locking you into one way of playing. This will be about Mirage from both a PUG and a team perspective, because PUG skills apply to Team CS, and Team CS skills apply to PUG CS. With all that said, let's kick this off with the most important thing to understand: macro. Macro is something you need to know, and depending on how early you are in your CS journey, learning a bit about macro could take you a couple levels higher in terms of skill, if you can implement it properly. So what is macro? Macro in Counter-Strike and general gaming terms is usually referring to map-wide or game-wide strategy. Macro is like a door down from game sense, meaning that by understanding macro strategies, you can better predict how players move across the whole map, and you can make better decisions for yourself. Let's go through Mirage Strategy 101. And fair warning, this is going to be quick. The star of the show is middle. The T and CT both fight for middle in a 1-3-1 setup. For the CT side, they put one short, connector, and window, who all have the responsibility to fight middle, and the T side sends 3 people to fight for middle. Then there's the A anchor and B anchor for the CT side, who have to stop any rushes, with the A anchor having to throw flashes for middle. Opposing them is the A lurk and the B lurk for the T side, with the A lurker being called the aggro lurk, either applying pressure A site to draw attention away from the middle fight, making mid takes easier for the T side, or using the chaos middle to get a pick on the A site due to getting an easy 1v1 duel. Then the B lurk's job is to prevent a CT from pushing B to leave open the option to go B late round. If the T side wins middle, they can execute onto a site with a decently high success rate. If the CT side win middle, they can double stack both A and B, leaving one player to hold middle. Congratulations, you can now play the first 30 seconds or so of Mirage. If you join a decently high level PUG, everyone's going to assume that this is the plan. It's the basics of how Mirage is played. There are obviously a bunch of other plans you can do instead. Rushing A site, doing an exec 20 seconds into a round, doing a later mid take, running a contact play into one of the sites. There are so many options other than this plan. But what makes the mid take so good is that it gives whoever wins middle such a huge advantage. So as a baseline, the plan should be a 1-3-1 early mid take. Without going through all the possible examples, doing something other than this should be reserved for when you see a gap in the enemy's play that you can abuse, or as an adjustment to your own team misplaying. And there's one little asterisk I have to talk about before moving on. What I've talked about here is mainly for PUGs. A coordinated team has much more options and control, such that early 1-3-1 mid takes, while still usually the default for pro teams, aren't the only option they have to start their games off, like you would in a PUG. But after an initial plan, you need to mid-round. Mid-rounding is just making a plan to win the round, and it's one of the most complicated and difficult things to do. But that's just at the pro level. In PUGs, it's actually pretty easy for an experienced player, because the amount of information that people give away in PUGs is really high. With that said, no matter how hard I've tried or how many times I've rewritten this section, which is 8 by the way, I cannot explain my thousands of hours of playing and even more time watching pro plays and explain how they apply to the specific context of each round. But what I can do is explain one simple concept that helps you start thinking the right way about mid-rounding at least, and that concept is pressure. This is a model to understand the way enemy players react on the map. It's all about information at the end of the day, because if you look at an empty minimap, a bad player will think they can be anywhere, a decent player will think they can be in a few spots, and a great player will have an exact assumption of the most likely place the enemy is playing. Pressure is a model for understanding how players move and react across the map throughout a round. So let's go through an example so you know what I mean by this. If your team applies pressure on one side of the map, you can assume the CTs will stay in that area to prevent a T from pushing, because they know a T is in that area. Let's look at the opposite. If you send no one to default B, a decent CT player will push, because they haven't seen any resistance. They think that they can take that opportunity to get into a great position to stop a late B hit, or that they can push deep and go for a flank, which only works against bad players who don't think about their flanks, but hey, mistakes are going to happen at every level of the game, I promise you that. So to actively implement this model into how you think about CS, when you find yourself in a spot where you have to mid-round, here's what you do. 1. Look at your minimap. 2. Recall the pressure applied across the map by both teams. 3. Make a prediction of where the CTs are most likely to play based on what pressure they've dealt with and given themselves. And 4, decide which site and by which route. Now that is simplifying an incredibly difficult skill that you will fail at, but it's a great place to start. And forgive me, but I'm now going to waffle about some things you should consider when trying to mid-round, without being able to explain any of it fully because it will take too long. So here are 11 things to consider when mid-rounding. First, your util. If you have no util, think about which site or route has the best fights to take without util. For example, B site contact is easier than an A site contact. Second, CT numbers, pretty self-explanatory. Go to the place with less enemies. Third, weapons. Different weapons have different strengths. Play to your weapon's strength. Fourth, time. Sometimes, doing nothing will stop the CTs from staying stacked on one site, making it easier to hit if you wait. And sometimes you need to move fast before the CTs rotate. Fifth, game context. You should keep track of how the enemy are playing. If they're a quick to rotate team, or if they like to push extremities, take these things into account. Sixth, conditioning. This is going to be a separate video about defaulting in the future, but the conditioning that they have attempted onto you, and the conditioning you attempt on them, these are things to consider in a mid-round call. For now, if you know, you know, it's a video for another day. Seventh, flanks. Almost doesn't bear saying for experienced players, but the knowledge that you're often on a timer of being flanked when in low number situations is important. You have two choices usually. Wait and go back and clear the flank slowly and fully, or be fully aware and go before that flank can activate. Eighth, fight visualization. Specifically imagining the fights you're going to have to take. This is an extremely useful thing when trying to mid-round, because it gives you a perfect understanding of how you expect your plan to go. By imagining every fight you're going to have to take on a route into a bomb site, you can often exclude impossible options, or at least understand the risk that you're taking properly. Ninth, teammate positioning. The best mid-round call be damned. If your team are going A, you're either lurking to get kills on rotators, or you're going A. And even if your teammates want to listen to you, you need to understand that them having to shift across the whole map to group up with you safely is a time investment you might not be able to afford. 10th, noise. When making a mid-round plan, you should have an accurate idea of when you'll make noise. It can be the second you see an enemy, or when you reach an angle that cannot be safely cleared while shifting. Either way, the shifting then making noise then shifting mistake is something I see a lot of worse players make, and it's a really costly one. 11th, picks versus site hits. When mid-rounding, you're either looking for a way to plant the bomb, or you're looking for a pick to be able to make another plan to plant the bomb later. If you can't see a way into a site, then look for picks. Now all of these things aren't things I'm going through like a checklist in my mind when I'm trying to mid-round. They're mostly subconscious, but I thought it would help to know at least where to start in terms of what you should be considering when trying to make a mid-round decision. Now that you know the basic macro of how Mirage is generally played, I wanted to give this little disclaimer, which is, you might know better than me. If you played a lot of CS and have played short CT side for a couple hundred games, you might have learned something I didn't. You might disagree with something I say, which is totally fine. It might be a stylistic difference, or you might just know something I don't. In which case, share it in the comments. Let us know. I'm trying to get across the general theory of each position, rather than the exacts of how to play them, because I can't go through every decision tree in every position. And even if I did tell you exactly how to respond in every situation, you definitely wouldn't remember it. It's better to learn on your own with a general idea of how the position is played, theoretically. Other than that, this video is split into sections from here, so you can skip around to sections that interest you more. But for now, let's just get straight back to T positions. T-side positions. In this section, I'm going to tell you about how to play every T-side position. And even if you don't want to play these positions or don't find yourself playing these positions very often, knowing their responsibilities and how they play out will help you a lot. As to the positions, you've got an aggro lurker on A, a passive lurker on B, and a 3-pack who take middle. Sometimes one of those pack players becomes an orphan. So let's start with the A lurk. This is generally called the aggro lurker because of the playmaking opportunities in this role, but it can be played passively or aggressively. The A lurker's job is to hold against CT pushes, to apply pressure to make the mid take easier, or to take advantage of mid chaos to get 1 versus 1 duels against the A anchor. So let's go through how to do all these things, starting with how to hold against a CT push. You have two choices, hold ramp or hold palace. You can go to either side if your plan is to play passively, because it's just about predicting where the CTs are going to push. So if you want to play passively holding for a push, you should probably have a reason. In my opinion, there are 2 reasons to play passively throughout a full round. The first is that you know from playing out the game so far that the CTs will push you eventually, and you're going to get a free kill. The second is that you know your team's going to carry you, and that you're not having the best game. It's a bleak situation, but playing to your current level is important. Sometimes the best thing you can provide is gathering information and not giving up an early man advantage. And when your team decides to hit a site, you can just go with them and play out the round normally. Now, you may start a round holding for a push and then decide to go aggressive later. Either way, you need to know how to hold properly. Here's where you can do it from depending on what you're expecting, starting with the ramp side. Starting off, you can play ultra safe and hold way back up on this sledge, which lets you hide if you get flashed, or play to peek only on timing, which will let you get an easy kill against the CT that pushes too deep. The downside is that you won't know if a CT is shifted into ramp, so be careful of that. If you want to hold ramp a bit more carefully, then this is the standard. You can play to hold here, CS2 holding, of course, where you constantly peek in and out. But from this position, you can avoid dying to flashbangs while still being able to know if you lose ramp. Now, I don't really recommend staying inside of ramp, because you're so vulnerable to being flashed, naded, or mollied. Moving on to Palace. There are 4 spots in Palace that I most commonly use to hold against a CT push, depending on what I'm expecting. The first up being close against this wall. It's good for catching CTs off guard who are rushing and expecting you to play further back in Palace. But you have to be careful of 2 things. The first is getting flashed, because you're completely vulnerable to a good pop flash here, but this isn't all that common in PUBG. The second is getting naded or mollied, which is a lot more common, but this position is really powerful at killing CTs who are rushing in, so it's worth using sometimes. The next position is back here. You can better dodge flashes from this position, and against SMGs or pistols, the longer range gunfight will favor you if you have an AK or an AWP. So this is a really reliable spot to hold from, with its only weakness being how predictable it is, as people are commonly going to be pre-aiming you. So if you hold this position, really focus in on your crosshair. The next position is here. This is a bit of a risky position, because if you get pre-aimed, you're probably going to lose the duel. And even if they miss, and you miss, once they get past the angle, they're given a lot of freedom to play out the gunfight in different ways. So this position is something I'd only really recommend when you have a worse gun, something like a Deagle or an SMG, because the close angle will favor you a lot more to begin with, and when the CT is running past the pillar, and the gunfight gets a bit more unpredictable, that's exactly where cheaper weapons will thrive better than in a straight up gunfight. The last position is way back here, but yeah, this position is really annoying for CTs to deal with, because only a really experienced player is going to clear it. And even when they do, they likely won't have a perfect pre-aim. The only way to go wrong in this position is if the CT catches you off guard by swinging the direction you're not looking. Usually a CT is going to swing like this, but you have to keep an ear out and react to the CT's noise to see if they're going to push you on the left. Okay, now we know how to hold as an A lurker, which is what you're going to be doing in between making plays. We can move on how to make plays as an A lurker. There are 2 ways to make plays, either through applying pressure or by getting picks. Getting picks is obviously more valuable, but it's also more risky. And on the other side, applying pressure is less risky, but less valuable. Applying pressure as the A lurk is all about making the A anchor unable to help middle. And secondly, getting the connector or jungle player to be distracted from middle. This can get complicated, and there are a million ways to do it, but the most simple way that works every time, throw this smoke or this smoke, be careful you don't get pushed, make a bunch of noise shooting and walking, and don't die. That last one is the most important. Do not die, because any and all pressure applied is completely removed the second you die. Essentially, the goal is to make the enemy think that you could push through the smoke at any second, and that they need to stare at it. You can push your limits over time of what you can get away with in terms of applying pressure, but this is a great thing to do most of the time if your team's taking mid as they should. Welcome to the Scuffed Zone, where I add in a bit more explanation in post because I'm really bad at scripting. So I realized that the advanced level of applying pressure isn't really covered here. And CS is super complicated, and no single move is perfect because everything has a counter, which unfortunately makes it really difficult for me to be able to tell you what moves are good and what moves are bad. If you want to learn pressure at a higher level though, then it becomes all about conditioning the CT to act the way you want them to, trying to get them into the rhythm of your game. I can't get into the specifics, default video coming at some point, but I can tell you that you should think of it in terms of set reactions like a flowchart, where each branch depends on a CT reaction. And as you play and you learn, your flowchart of knowledge grows, with you eventually being able to react to any situation you see because you've seen it before. You'll have built out that flowchart of knowledge, and you'll have set plans that you can lean back on for how you'll apply pressure. Here's a simple one that I tend to do. Sometimes when I'm going A, to lurk, whether I'm going palace or ramp to hold, I'll throw this flash over the top of ramp at the start of the round. Then I'll play the round out normally. And after 2 or 3 rounds of doing this, then I'll push ramp. And when I do push, the CT won't get blinded by the flash, but they also won't expect a T to push them with that flash. So when they re-peek, they won't be expecting a fight. It's a small thing, but it tends to be effective. That was the Scuffed Zone, back to the video. But let's move on to how to get picks. which is so important to do, because going for picks, even if it doesn't always work, will help you win more rounds, because it helps you apply pressure in giving the CTs the belief that you really will push them. So, the best place to get picks from is Palace. Ramp ends up being more difficult to get picks from because of how easy it is for the CT to peek it on timing with perfect crosshair placement, whereas Palace has an elevation difference, and people are much less likely to expect it, especially at lower elos. So, you're in Palace. At its simplest level, to get a kill, you need to peek out Palace and shoot the A anchor. It's all about timing. At the crux of getting picks as the aggro lurker on A, you need to wait until you think the CT either isn't looking at Palace or is distracted in any way. A lot of people end up being scared to peek, which is why this position can be so unimpactful for lower elo players. I've seen countless players play passive in Palace for full T halves only to get 2 kills from pushing CTs, having no real impact on the game. Okay, you need to be brave. At some point, look at your minimap. If your teammates are fighting middle and they're getting pushed back in somewhat uneven manner, you can be pretty sure there aren't 2 players staring at Palace. Even if 1 player is staring at Palace, at worst, that's like a 50-50 duel, meaning there's an equal chance you win or lose it. And by taking the duel, you're helping your chances of winning more rounds, even if you don't win the duel. Because like I mentioned before, you need to be showing the CT that you're willing to swing them at any point in the round. Make the times when you're applying pressure much more effective. It puts credibility behind your actions. So be brave as an A-lurker, but don't be stupid. Still be thinking cerebrally about when you should be going for your pick. Keep an ear and an eye out for all the information the CT gives you. Footsteps can tell you where to pre-aim when you peek, or even just a location the CT player likes to play. Grenades thrown tell you patterns of how an A anchor plays out his rounds. The trajectory of grenades can also tell you the CT's position if you read it correctly. And even a lack of noise can tell you something. If there's no grenades, footsteps, or noise from the CTs, you can assume one of a few things is happening. Either there's an AWPer holding that angle who wants to get peeked, they're gamble stacking the A site wanting to get peeked, or the A site anchor is alone and vulnerable to getting peeked on a timing. And the final option being that there's no one here and you have to use your game sense or the context of the round / the game to make a guess. And then you've got to probe for information or go for a play. I'll cap this section off on how to play an A lurker with a few CT mistakes to look out for that you can abuse. The first being the nade set. The first thing CT players learn is that they should be throwing the ramp molly every round. And some players do exactly this. So if you're lurking A every round, and every round like clockwork you hear the same Molotov from the same position, you can just kill that guy. Just wide swing. Molotovs don't do that much damage. And if you have an AK, the CT likely won't be expecting the fight. Now, don't get me wrong, good players will play properly and hold for a push after they Molotov. But if you pair your push with a good flashbang, it's still not a bad fight. Because I'll talk about this later, but the real mistake you're punishing here is the lack of variety in the CT's default. Second mistake, abuse the CT's noise. Footsteps are inevitably going to be made by a CT player. But if they're loudly stomping around the whole round, every round, eventually you need to shut them up. Because you can't just pre-aim them, wide swing and take them down. Noise from a CT anchor is often a mistake. Abuse it. Third mistake, smoking off Palace without a reason. This is a weird one that people holding A do way too often. But if they smoke Palace and hold ramp with their gun, there's only one position they can do that from without leaving themselves completely vulnerable, which is right here. And often they probably won't be there. It's a really common mistake, because a Palace smoke to me is a big sign that says, I am not watching Palace, you are free to peek me. It's often a free kill if they're holding ramp from any of these positions. The one caveat being that you have to have a reasonable assumption that there isn't another player jungle or con staring towards Palace, which is something you can safely assume if you're reading your minimap correctly and the CTs are fighting / holding mid. Moving on to the mid pack. The job of these 3 is to go middle and take it. I'm going to go through 2 scenarios. One being the ideal mid take, where all 3 are doing their job properly, and the second being the less ideal mid take, when maybe you're the only one fighting for it, or maybe you've got a missing player or a missing smoke. So you know what to do when you're alone, or how to fill in gaps if not everyone's doing their job properly. The average ideal mid take looks something like this. Instant window smoke, cross smoke, connector smoke, with the player back here throwing these flashes, and 2 players running up and flashing for themselves as well, following up with a Molotov under. Doing all this will all but ensure that you can take middle. If you lose the fights after throwing this much util, then the problem is in the micro of your aim and your mechanics. But trust me, you will lose this fight sometimes no matter how perfect your util set. So it's good to think of this util set as a baseline rather than something that wins every situation. It is something you need to do pretty often, but you still need good mechanics to back it up. Now, one caveat, you don't want to always be throwing this much utility mid. because it can limit you in your late round. But if you need mid and aren't getting it, this setup is what you should be doing. Moving on to the less ideal scenario, where you're getting less help or no help at all. Your goal as a middle player is to still fight for mid control, even if you're just applying pressure. So, in a situation where you're alone, the most important smoke to throw is the cross smoke. This is because a connector smoke, short smoke, or window smoke don't mean anything if the CTs just peek and see that no one's middle. The cross smoke makes CTs have to constantly worry about someone being top boxes, which is really valuable. And you don't even have to go out middle to apply this pressure. You could just smoke the cross and hold CT pushes towards top middle or T-spawn. But with the basic mid take explained, which is really that simple of throw utility and run out like this, I'm going to explain how an AWP fits into this later. But for now, I want to explain some variations upon the mid take and how T's should respond to it. The first is this thing. This CT smoke is the most common and the most dangerous thing you're going to come across when doing mid takes. To counter it, spam it, nade it, and keep it in mind, because there's likely going to be a CT behind it ready to murder you. The second thing is the short player. Just being ready for the short player to wide swing you at any time is really important. And just be careful not to run into their crosshair when they're holding really deep, especially if they have an AWP. Moving on to chair or down short can be really dangerous. The other thing to look out for from the CT side is just raw power. So what I mean by this is that mid fights aren't really about utility sets. They're more about power. The utility is just a prerequisite. Mid fights, certainly in pugs, are about raw mechanics at the end of the day, and even in pro games to some extent. Both teams throw the utility to be able to take the fights, where if either team doesn't do it properly, they don't get to fight properly. But if both teams throw utility properly, the mid fight becomes about raw mechanics. So you really can just run it down if you get the utility down properly. If you're a mid player, you need to have a higher level of focus and intensity compared to how lurkers are playing. I can go through details of how to play every variation until the cows come home, but if the CTs throw good flashes, run top middle and blow your head off, none of it's gonna matter. It's a mechanically demanding position, so just be ready for it. Let's move on to the AWPer. Because the AWPer is often in the mid pack, I'll go through how the AWPer impacts the mid take, following it up with how to play the AWP across the rest of the map. So in a mid take, the AWPer can be going for a pick window if they get a good spawn, holding for a connector peek, or holding for a top mid push. The only thing to be mindful of is support and flashbangs. What I mean by this is always being mindful of what happens if you're going to get flashed, because it's really common in middle. So it's okay to hold for a top mid push if you've got two riflers behind you, ready to kill them if you get blinded. But if you're alone, maybe you should play a bit further back. A great tip I got from this Monacy video a while back is when mid is relatively stable after you've taken it, it's the AWPer's job to hold for pushes, or smoke breaks. Admittedly, this is more common in the insanely high elo games that Monacy's going to be playing in, but a play to watch out for is still to watch for a CT to nade open the window smoke and peek. It's super easy to punish if you stare at the smoke with an AWP before it's even naded, but as an AWPer you can play it aggressively or passively, depending on how good you are with the AWP. Either way, you need to be throwing the right util and playing around your team. Whether that's flashing for them and holding angles to let them push, or going in first and taking duels with the AWP up close. Or even by walking into angles and taking duels that way. There are an insane amount of options with the AWP. And to be honest, how to AWP is a different video. So for now, let's keep it to Mirage. Moving on to the rest of the map. Because the AWP has a responsibility beyond middle, the AWPer's job is to win rounds, more so than the rest of the players on the team. You don't get to buy the most expensive gun in the game and just be one of the team. You have to get value. You gotta be making plays. So if you get a spawn for A or for B, you should probably be making a play. So I'm going to give you all the options you need so you've got a decent playbook to work with. Let's work left to right from A to B, and I'll rate the level of aggression for each play from 1 to 3. 1 being passive, 3 being aggro. Palace hold. For this one, you run to Palace and hold it with an AWP. It's consistent, but there's no guarantee of value beyond the holding of map control. Palace peek. Great for when the CT isn't smoking off Palace and are constantly rotating between mid and A. You can hold jungle and kill anyone who carelessly rotates. Ramp hold. A great low-risk option that can give you a free shot on a CT crossing towards con. Bonus points if you get a friend to boost you. Ramp peek. Great to catch off guard a CT who's expecting a rifler, but it is dangerous if you run into an off angle or a CT holding with an AWP themselves. Con hold. Holding for a con peek is great. The only risk is flashbangs towards top middle and top middle pushes, but it can be covered with teammates. Window peek. Dangerous, high risk, high reward. Be faster and you win. You might die to con, a top mid push, or just a flash, or even just losing the fight. Upper B hold. Safe, consistent, but similar to the Palace hold, won't get you value every time. The B peek. Great for catching a jump spotting CT off guard, but it can be a difficult shot if you're not used to it. Low risk and a decently moderate shot difficulty. Now there are obviously more plays with the AWP than this. There's probably an infinite number of plays with the AWP, but that's a great basic playbook to get you started. The B lurk. also known as the passive lurker. The strength and impact of the passive lurker on B isn't shown in every single round. It's in the ability to win a round all by themselves after gaining information across a half, which is incredibly important to understand, so that you aren't trying to do too much every single round. Right, so how do you play the B lurk? Your job is to prevent the CT from pushing into apps and to gather information. Right, let's start off with how to prevent pushes first because it's simpler. So the CTs love to push into B apps, because a common mistake made by T-sides and pugs is to leave no one lurking B. And even if someone is B, the CT could just Molotov deep, then throw a smoke, allowing them to get an entrenched position deep in apps. And that puts them in a pretty good position to get a multi-frag later in the round. You need to try and stop them from doing this. The key tool is the Molotov. If the CT isn't Molotoving deep apps early and just pushing without it, it can be better to just swing wide and kill the CT as they're jumping into apps. But if the CT is playing more robustly, mollying deep and then pushing, you can deny their push with a deep Molotov towards balcony. But generally it's all about timing, because the smart CT player will use all their utility to get into a good position. They'll be Molotoving deep, smoking afterwards, and then be pushing after it's smoked, leaving a small amount of gaps for the T to try and stop them getting into apps. From here, you need to use your own initiative to read how the CT's playing, either Molotoving through the smoke and then pushing it, or giving up the control for now with plans to leave or retake it later. The next part of B-lurking is information gathering. This is where the impact of the B-lurk comes in. Right, so how do you gather information? Step 1. Don't make any noise yourself. CTs are much more likely to give information like footsteps if they think no one's in apps. Step 2. Keep an ear out. Noise tells you where the CT likes to play from, what nades they like to throw, and when they're rotating. Step 3. Be consistent. Go lurk B for a large majority of the half, because lurking B is about gathering enough information about patterns and tendencies so you can make a round-winning call or play. Comparing it to the aggro lurker who's expected to apply pressure or go for picks for consistent value, the B lurk's job is to win a round or two on the T half by abusing patterns that they've noticed and getting a free pick into the bomb site. B lurking is kind of like building a case when you're a detective, trying to find the weakness in the CTs, what they're doing wrong. CT sides often send their worst players B, so you're going to be able to find gaps, I promise you that. And often it's about thinking about how you can make gaps in the CT's defense, using utility, timings, or looking for picks. But let's talk about pressure, because whilst B lurking is the passive lurker, and applying pressure every round doesn't get a large amount of value, it doesn't mean you should never try and apply pressure. The most common situations I find myself wanting to apply pressure as a B lurker are as follows. 1. When I'm trying to mask a rush in the following round, or 2. When I'm trying to bait out CT utility either to waste their economy or to attack them later in the round when they've got less Molotovs or smokes. And both of these situations fall under the same category of trying to keep the CTs honest, making sure they don't skimp on their util usage and that they respect what you're doing. And often a single flashbang thrown over apps early in the round can get the CTs to dump all of their util in response. Molotoving, smoking, nading. Sometimes the short player is even going to join in with that. B lurking can be a trap for throwing the round though, because if you sit B all round, you will lose. Knowing when to leave is important. And lurking is a whole other video I will have to make at some point because it's really complicated. But as far as B on Mirage, just take note when the call is made. You gotta be thinking about how the round is going to end. So if your team are going A, don't shift out B after they do it. You either need to take action before they hit A or rotate mid to cut off rotations, or even rotate A to the site with them. It's not really acceptable to shift out B hoping you can get one kill and relying entirely on your team whether or not you win or lose the round. Moving on to the CT positions. So the B anchor is the easiest position to play because there's only one choke and you're always going to be the last person that has to rotate, so it's not usually something you have to think about. You're only ever going to be rotating if the bomb really shows on the map or in ultra late round situations. Again, the role of a small site anchor is too complicated for one little section in this video. Another time, I'm sorry, but here's how to play specifically as a B anchor. So here's how you hold B at its most basic level. Molotov deep apps every round. Then you got two choices. Try and take control of apps, or play for information by jump spotting. Let's start with taking apps first. After that initial molly that you throw deep into apps, you can smoke it off and then push. The idea behind this is that you get into a position that allows you to get a multi-kill if the T's push. Good spots for that are here, here, and here. The second option is to play for information, jump spotting, where you bounce up and down here, or jump like this over and over again until you see someone. And then when you see someone, you throw a defensive smoke and play with the goal to isolate walls and delay the T push. You try and allow your CT team to rotate. And this is the gold standard defensive smoke, because it's pretty easy to play around it, and once you get a kill, you can run back into it and hide inside it. It's hard to verbalize how to run in and out of smoke trying to isolate duels, but it's all about playing tricksy, keeping an ear out and abusing the smoke. And you'll learn just by doing. Okay, now you know the most simple way, let's dive a bit further into the complexities of playing B. Let's go through double setups, when to play to retake, when to push into apps, when to push deep into apps, or when to play to hold, and how to use your utility as a B anchor. Double setups. If you have a short player who doesn't have to hold short or is running in to assist against an unexpected sight hit, you can do a double setup, which can be a crossfire or a contact setup. Double setups are super powerful, and using them isn't just about pre-planned or pre-commed teamwork. If you see a spot your teammates playing, and you know how to play off them in such a way that it be a double setup, you can just move and make them part of your double setup. You don't need to say anything. Let's get through these quickly, because they're either contact or crossfire setups, with crossfires being self-explanatory, and contact setups being where one player takes contact, making the second player peek. Here are the crossfires. Balcony to short, under window to jail, and bench to short. Here are the contact setups. Backside and car, with the car player taking contact, backside and short, with the short player taking contact. Now I can't stress enough how powerful double setups are, so you should use them whenever you can. When should you play retake? Now playing to retake as a B anchor isn't really ideal, and the only time coming to mind is when you're playing to delay. Hey, editing guy here. One additional scenario I forgot and just remembered is when you have a man advantage of +2 or more over the enemy, and leaving the site to play retake is technically better than taking an advantage duel on the site, because you'll win the round nearly 100% of the time if you're retaking with +2 or more numbers over the enemy numbers, but you might not win every advantage gunfight. So you'll probably start in the side still, and go for kills or try to slow the T's down. And in this case, being able to run away after you secure a man advantage and later retaking with your team is good. But it's also relatively uncommon because of how difficult it is to get off the site when T's are running you down on B. It's usually ride or die when you're a B anchor. When should you push apps? This is a style choice in my opinion, because in my case I like pushing apps most rounds, forcing the T's to have to deal with me. But it's equally valid to go for jump spots most rounds instead. There are enough close range angles around the car and B site that pushing into apps isn't mandatory if you've only got an SMG or a pistol. Alright, but when do you go further and push deep into apps? Now there is a caveat here. This play is objectively bad to do alone, which isn't to say it won't work, just to say that you're never winning the fight against a T holding an off angle inside of apps. So I would only throw in a deep apps push if I have a strong reason to believe that the T's aren't holding it. Maybe I haven't seen any evidence of a T holding it in like the last 5 rounds or something. But even then, it isn't something I'd do against really good players. Which again, isn't to say it wouldn't work, because it likely would, as people just don't like to look B, but it is very risky. One last thing to talk about before we move on to the other CT positions, and it's arguably the most important, and that's your utility. As a CT player, no matter the role, you need to have a plan for the whole round, based around your utility, even if you have no utility at all. So if you're buying just a gun, you need to have a plan with what play you're going to make that fits your purchase. So in this case, if you're the B anchor and only have a Molotov, you can't really be jump spotting, because you don't have a defensive smoke to throw and will likely just get run down without being able to do anything. So you either need to push into apps with that Molotov, or not throw the Molotov instantly, waiting to see the T's and playing to run away and delay using that Molotov. Or if you have a flashbang and a deagle, you can't just hold an angle on B. You either need to take a peek early, or play slow and wait for a T to push, then try and catch them off guard with a set pop flash as they push in. Now, all of that rambling just means the same thing. Purchase with purpose. Short. Your job is to fight for middle, hold short, and assist your B player if the site gets it. It's an extremely varied role, and I would argue that there are more options for a short player than in any other position, ranging from being completely passive to fully aggressive. And it isn't about something being better than the other, it can be a purely stylistic choice. You can play to support your teammates, play to go for kills middle, or just play to hold your position in multiple ways, all whilst having the option to participate in the mid fight as though you were the con or the window player. To explain how to play short, I'm going to structure it like this. We'll start with middle, following up with short and ladder, then ending with deep short, explaining how to play aggressive or passive in all of these spots. And I hope it'll give you some idea of when to transition between each of the spots. Starting with middle. Now like I mentioned before, if you're fighting for middle as a short player, you probably need a good spawn. And you can't go all the way through B to short. It takes way too long and you'll be running into T's top middle before you get there. So you really need to be jumping cat or jumping out of window and running up mid. Both are fine. If you're jumping down into middle and running up, you should probably be flashing top middle for yourself at least once or twice, and be playing anti-flash until you peek by staring at the wall to your left and down. Then you peek top middle and take the fight. And if something goes wrong, you can retreat back into con, because it's fine to play 2 players in con and try and re-aggro back into middle later in the round. To hold middle after you've taken the initial gunfights, there are 2 main setups. The first requires 2 players and is really strong, where one holds top middle, peeking this angle over and over, whilst the second holds under. The second setup is a bit less powerful as it has obvious gaps, but its advantage is that it only takes 1 player, and that's this spot right here. By playing behind the mid boxes, you can hold for an under push most of the time, and peek towards a T-spawn on timing. And if you get the timing right, you can catch any players shifting towards top middle, while spending the majority of your time watching for that under to mid push. Moving on to short. To play aggressive from short is pretty simple. Not to say it's easy, because it can be quite difficult, but it is simple. What you do is you go short through B, and when you feel like the timing is right, you just swing. The biggest problem with this fight is that if the T's flash properly and smoke the cross, that can leave you very vulnerable. So just don't overswing or overstay your welcome by waiting too long after you swing out. It's a decent fight, especially if you throw a flash, or if your teammates are also fighting middle. It's not something I'd do every round in an evenly matched game, only when my teammates are really going to be wanting to fight with me. And there are a bunch of ways to peek this angle middle from short, you just really need to decide what you want to go for. There are 3 main choices. The first being top right boxes. This is the safest of the 3 fights I'm going to mention, as you don't really have to swing that wide, and you're kind of waiting for them to peek you rather than the other way around. But you might not get peeked. And if they do peek, it is about a 50-50 fight. Now the second fight is to fight the T player as they're running down middle in front of the top boxes. And the third is to try and catch the T's off guard as they cross to top boxes. This is only for when you have the best spawn possible, and I can't get into the variations of peeking mid more than that because there are way too many. But at the end of the day, if you're fighting mid with your teammates and throwing good utility, you'll never go too wrong. Now, to play more passively, but still apply pressure middle, there's one key smoke you gotta know, and that's right here. This blocks off the T side from pushing you hyper aggressively, and it lets you focus on other angles. It also gives you space to throw nades towards top middle, like a Molotov or a grenade, and it also gives you some decent peeks if you want to go for them. If you pair the 2 up, Molotov top boxes with a peek, you can sometimes catch burning T's as they're escaping. On the other hand, you could play it more passively. But in my opinion, switching up your game, playing aggressively around the smoke some rounds and passively in others, ends up working out better for you in the long run. It means they have to respect the possibility that you're going to peek them as they go through middle every single round. To play passively short, you do have to be careful though, because the T's have a large number of ways to push you off. The confined space makes it easy to deal with you with just one Molotov, and that bench peek is really brutal to deal with. So to play short passively, I'd really recommend playing inside of ladder room most rounds, because it's really difficult to dislodge a CT in ladder without running into a bunch of potential off angles. And if you are in ladder, you can extend your control beyond short. You can also hold jungle or under window if you really need to. Now a little side note before I move on, the movement in CS2 is a bit heavy, a bit floaty, which makes holding angles suck. So I want to reiterate, when I say hold, except for AWPers, I don't mean holding an angle statically. I mean holding it like this, constantly moving, going in and out of the angle. Moving on though, to play even more passively, you can play deep short, smoking it off and holding for the T's to push the smoke. And once it dissipates, you can either retreat into the B site, or play one of these off angles and try to hold the short push. In this situation though, just be careful of what your B anchor's doing. Because if they're hiding car, don't be shocked when a T jumps out of window on B and gives you a new haircut. And before you blame the B anchor in that situation, know that it's not their fault. They can't hold everything. Maybe they've only got an SMG, maybe they don't have any util, and the only way they can dodge flashes is to play in car. You can adjust to them. They might not be able to adjust to you. But now that I've given you a rundown of how the short position plays out, let's talk about rotations, because the short player has enough freedom to be able to rotate if middle is either not pressured or the CTs have taken it. But they also need to be able to understand the rotations of other players, because it's the short player that has the ability to be able to cover jungle or connector if they leave. So if you play short, keep an eye on your minimap, not just so that you can know when to rotate, but also to cover for your teammates' rotations. Now ideally the short player won't be needing to rotate, except in the situation where the A site's being hit. But because of how little the B site can tend to get hit in pugs, and how powerful a stacked site can be, you can gamble stack towards the A site as the short player with less risk than any other position leaving. But there'll always be a risk in rotating like this, because you're leaving your B player alone against any site hits, which is even worse if they get split from apps and short. So look for patterns in the T plays, and take risks accordingly. Next up is window. How do you play window? Oh, it's smoked. window gets smoked off a lot. But let's go through how to play window, whether it's smoked or not, and how and when to rotate around the map, and even how to do these things in different playstyles. Now, you should be fighting middle most rounds as the window player. You can go window or con depending on the spawn you get. If you have an AWP, you can hold from window like this, or connector like this. All are fine, but like I said, window gets smoked pretty often. So what do you do when window is smoked? Now, there are a couple things. You can either give up middle for now, playing it more passively, or you can throw nades and reposition to fight for mid regardless of the smoke. You need to figure out if your teammates are going to fight for mid, because if your teammates are going to fight, you can join them. Otherwise, you should probably play it more passively. Right, so how do you help your teammates fight mid? The number one thing is utility. This Molotov here is great for pushing T's away from top boxes, so much so that it's pretty much mandatory. You can also assist with flashbangs or by nading towards top mid boxes. The last thing being that you can also throw a nade like this into the smoke and quickly peek towards top mid. But other than utility, if you want to fight middle immediately, you have three choices. Rotate to con, rotate to short, or jump out window. With that last one being extremely risky and not really recommended unless you have two teammates already fighting middle. And even then, it's probably not a good idea. And that rotate con being the most preferable usually and the most easy, because the short rotation takes too long and you're kind of giving up full control of jungle. And even if you do rotate to connector, either you or your con player still needs to be responsible for jungle to make sure the T's don't get in there, which neatly segues me to how to play passively in window. Your job here is to just hold jungle, being very careful of T's pushing short, jumping into this spot under, or T's jumping into window. But this is where we get into the real reason that window is the most desired position to play by most people. Because the window player doesn't really need to be in window. This is because it's easy for the con player or the short player to keep an eye on jungle, which frees up the window player to go wherever they want, and rotating is a really difficult skill. It's something that often defines some of the best players in the world. Think your Monasys or your Zywus. These phenoms can read the game perfectly, because that's what this position is all about. Reading the game, predicting where the enemy is going to attack and bolstering that area. Or even just to go aggressive elsewhere on the map and look for a pick by force. So if you're a window player, said it a million times, keep a keen eye on the minimap. Do your best to predict where the enemy is going to hit, and if you've got no idea where to start with this kind of thing, a great way of thinking about it for a beginner is to reverse engineer as though you were a T with perfect information. It's super easy when you think about it like this. Just look at your minimap, see where you and your team are weakest, and make the assumption the T's will perfectly know to hit there. Now, it's not a perfect model, but if you need a place to start, this is great. A more advanced way of looking at it is to ignore all of that and just accurately predict everything, which is obviously much more difficult, but it is also more effective, obviously. But if you simply bolster weaknesses on the map, you're never going to go too wrong, because if you go where your team is weakest, then the T's attack where your team are strong, the round will have a decent chance of going your way, even if you're not there. Now let's talk about mid re-aggression, because you aren't going to win mid every round. Sometimes the T's will block your whole team out with too much utility that it isn't worth fighting into middle early round, and you'll need to fight back into middle later in the round. As far as doing this with a team, it's pretty simple. Just ask for a good middle flash from a teammate and peek with multiple players. But much more often, you're going to be alone. So a great way to re-aggro from window alone is by clearing angles and doing so quietly, because someone will likely be holding window from one of these three spots, whilst other players are working down short or bottom middle towards con. So as a window player, you can often get a decent fight against that short player without needing any util. On the other hand, if the numbers are lower on the T side, let's say they've only got 3 players, there's a much higher chance they won't be watching window, and they'll instead be working their way towards con or short. But the key is not to overpeak. Try and hide when you're peeking from this angle top boxes if you're trying to kill the short player, or this angle top boxes if you're trying to kill the bottom middle player. But if you want an ultra consistent way of peeking middle from window, you can peek when you hear them pushing towards con, using the sound cue to peek the unsuspecting T's. Just be extremely careful of T's trying to get a pick into window from this position under, because it's really common. So before we move on to the con position, you have to realize as the window player that you're the AWPer. Again, similar to the T side, you have a responsibility to have an impact on the map by going for picks or taking extra map control. So let's give you a playbook. Let's go through some AWP plays for the CTs across the map, starting with B side. 2 come to mind. The first is to jump into apps and hold the line like this. You're hoping for a free pick when the T's peek, not expecting an AWP. The second being to hold for a B pick from market, hoping that the lack of a Molotov from the B anchor entices a T to walk into your crosshair, and freeing up your B anchor to rotate and make plays elsewhere. Next up is short. You can hold from short at this angle to stop T's getting into chair. Just be careful of staying too long, because a short peek up close can decimate you, and the T side commonly end up throwing Molotovs and nades here in the mid round. But if you want to get aggressive short with an AWP, you can hold from the inside of ladder room with a decent spawn, or just jump towards short and hold this angle, which can be difficult, but powerful if the Ts aren't expecting it. Next up is the obvious window peek, but you can also hold top middle more aggressively by jumping out of window, or by going into connector at the top of con or the bottom of con down here. Moving on to A site, as you cross towards con with any decent con spawn, you can jump onto this bench and hold for any T's inside ramp to try and push. You can also hold ramp mid-round by smoking off Palace and going on top of stairs looking deep into ramp. Another aggressive play is to run into Palace early in the round and hold this aggressive line. With that, you should have a decent enough simple playbook to attempt to AWP on Mirage, but let's move on to connector. Now this is a really high impact position because the con player arguably has the most impact on whether the CT side wins middle or not. So as you're going con to fight, oh yeah, watch out for this pick from ramp. But anyway, let's work top to bottom, starting from top middle to bottom middle, and how to play inside con or rotate around the map otherwise. To fight top middle, pretty simple. You're either going to be jumping out window or running through con. Try and dodge flashes, make sure to flash top mid yourself once or twice, and do your best. Not much more to say about this, it's just an aim duel. Just be confident and focus on your crosshair. Bottom middle. This can be played a bit more tactically rather than just running it down. The number one thing to play bottom middle is this smoke. It gives you a lot of space to play around. You can fight around it towards top mid, peek through it aggressively with a flash, throw nades towards top boxes, hold under, or just waste the T's time and then retreat. It's a great smoke, and it's mostly mandatory if you want to play towards this part of middle. Now for holding and fighting from con, to fight from con you can peek under from con, which is pretty safe, peek short from con, which is kind of safe, or peek towards under chair from con, which isn't safe at all. But the general idea is to peek angles where the T's will be dealing with another angle when you peek them. For under, they're going to be looking straight at you, but it's a decent fight anyway. For short, they'll be watching window, or depending on how you peek them, they might not be ready for you at all. For peeking towards under chair, the idea is that you try and catch the T's that are preparing to pre-aim into con. To hold it, you can play from here, here, or here, with not being inside of con being preferable, because it makes it easier to dodge flashes or to retreat if you're going to get overwhelmed. And it gives you more control over the angles that you're peeking. And if you are the con player and your window player rotates, depending on what your short player is doing, it might be your responsibility to hold jungle, which you can do by peeking con and jungler on a timing, which looks something like this. Just be careful and mindful that you can get timing by a con player or a T player in jungle, so keep a focus on your crosshair. But you also have two more responsibilities as the con player. The first is to help A when the A site anchor is being pressured. The second is to play as the rotator, if your window player is playing more passive and holding jungle. And if you lose middle, it's important not to try and hold con against 3 or more T's alone. You should respond in like a macro sense rather than a micro of just taking the fight. Try and join with your A player, fight for ramp or fight for palace, and then kill the T's when they push into A later in the round. And the last note on how to play as a con player is that you don't have to rotate just because you can. If everything's stable across the map, maybe just hold your position. The A site anchor. As an A anchor, you're the big site anchor. Your responsibility on Mirage is to hold the A site, to assist your mid players, and to gather information about the T side's plan. And finally, you can try and fight for map control. Let's start with how to hold the A site. But before we do, I want to really hammer home a concept, and that's using your nades for a purpose, because I think it's more important here than any other position. You need to be using your grenades in such a way that when the number of grenades you have in your belt hits 0, you've put yourself in a position to win the round. Whether that's by using your util to gain map control, or delaying and baiting out all the enemy util with your own, or even just by not using your util until the enemy forces you to by pushing into the site. It's just something to keep in mind when I explain the basics of A site, because people can fall into patterns and end up autopiloting without planning on how they plan to win the round. Right, back to A site though. To hold A site, there are 3 basic ways. The first being to push, because you can pretty easily hold or retake A site if you have ramp control or palace control. So I'm going to go through a basic plan to push ramp or to push palace. To push ramp, you need a Molotov, a nade, and a flash. And if you want to ensure success, you need a teammate to push with you. But it is perfectly acceptable to do it alone, just slightly more risky. The key with this play is to throw your util properly, and to not do it too often, only once or twice a half. Ramp pushes work really well early in the round, and if you're a better player than the enemy, it's a great way to get value and have impact as a site anchor. The palace hit is a bit worse than the ramp fight, because if a T is holding you properly, you're not likely to win the fight. But if you are taking the fight mid-round, you can end up catching a T off guard, and there are some pretty perfect flashes that you can get from a teammate to be thrown into Palace, which can lead to easy kills. But let's be honest, you're not going to be pushing most rounds in an even game. So here's your standard. Molotov ramp, flash for middle, hold for a push. This is your basis. From this point, you have a couple options. You can smoke off ramp if your teammates are fighting towards middle or elsewhere, leaving you weak and alone on the site, or you can save your smoke and play in the site holding for a push. When you do get pushed, you throw a defensive smoke. Your final option though is to play retake and just leave the site completely. So let's go through every decision in a bit more depth. Let's go through the positions you can reliably hold from the site, starting with under Palace. Here you'll be fully hiding, waiting for noise Tetris, either peeking with this flash when you hear noise, or playing completely silently and being ready to smoke yourself when the T's Molotov you. And that's with the purpose of delaying as much time as possible. Or you can take the fight when they swing you, hoping to get a multi-kill. Next up is holding default. Here you'll be peeking ramp on timings, but mainly holding Palace. You'll throw a defensive smoke if you see a site hit coming, but otherwise you'll be trying to kill T's that walk out dry. Next is to hold from triple, similarly timing between Palace and ramp. Or you can play firebox peeking on timing towards Tetris, or hiding fully and holding only for the Palace swing, with potential to kill a bomb planter if you're undiscovered. Or you can hide in sandwich or ninja, which is risky but has a huge reward. Any position other than default, triple, under Palace tends to be a risk in my opinion, with the risk being that you're essentially hoping you're not going to get hard cleared by the T side, hoping to catch them off guard, which can work. It just isn't something you can do reliably every round. And without getting too deep into anchor theory, if you are holding inside of a site, you should be playing for a multi-kill or have the utility to be able to delay, primarily a smoke, because if you aren't throwing a defensive smoke when the site gets hit, you're going to end up being an easy kill. But if you don't think you can hold the site because of guns or any number of reasons, you should probably be playing to retake. Now if you are playing to retake, you should be in ticket or CT, ready to delay by taking low risk fights and throwing utility to delay. I'll go deeper into how to retake A later, but if you are playing retake on A, you can jump spot from ticket or hold like this for the Palace swing, being ready to leave and being careful not to allow the A ramp players to swing you from lower by not holding this angle for too long. The key is to delay and not die. Now that you know how to play the site in 3 different ways, push, hold, or retake, you need to know how to gather information and read the map as you do it, because the information you get as an A anchor is enough to be able to understand T movements across the whole map. On Mirage, the A anchor gets more information than any other position. This is just because of where the A anchor can be situated. If you manage to get ramp control, you're in a position to hit everything in mid, T-spawn, and towards A, which is more information than any other role on the CT side. So you can read the map better than anyone, and you should be using all the info you hear and see to be able to come to your team and make decisions based on what the T side is doing. Even a good team which won't make any noise as freely as a bad team still have to make noise as they go middle. An absence of information can tell you just as much. Game sense and reading information takes a long time to learn, but if you pay attention and try and make educated guesses about how the T's are moving around the map, that's one of the ways an A-site anchor can have a large impact on the game. So that's the basics of Mirage CT side. But here's some last notes. If you're in a position and your team is consistently losing elsewhere on the map, don't just let it happen. Tell them you're going to switch with them, or just go there and leave your site empty and play retake, because the alternative isn't working. Counter-Strike's a rock, paper, scissors game at the end of the day though, so be ready to adjust and switch up your play no matter what role you are playing, because every action you do does have a counter. Utility. I'm not a huge believer in learning 1000 pieces of utility, so let's keep it as bare minimum as possible to be able to play Mirage at a high level. Don't get me wrong, knowing more nades will improve you as a player, but I don't have the time or the memory, and I'm busy. This is going to be quick. T-side smokes. Market. Get right. Get left. Window. Connector. Cross. Jungle. Stairs. CT. T-side flashes. A god flash. A lamp flash. A entry flash. Over palace flash. Mid flash 1. Mid flash 2. Mid flash 3. B god flash. B entry flash 1 and B entry flash 2. Under flash. T-side Molotovs. Under palace. Car. Window. Under. Jungle. Short. CT side smokes. Ramp. Palace. Bottom middle. Aggro short. Passive short. B apps. Defensive B. CT flashes. A to mid. Short to mid. CT to mid. Palace. Retake A. Retake B. Top mid. Ramp. CT Molotovs. Ramp. Deep B apps. Top boxes from window. Under from con. Under from short. I only included nades that I use every single game. Those nades are the simplest and smallest list I think you would need to play Mirage at a decent level. Some of them don't even need lineups. But if there are some nades there that you aren't throwing, you should really consider adding them to your playbook. Pistol round strats. This may seem odd to have something so specific, but pistol rounds are so important for winning games. So if you have a strat that you can come into a game with for T-side, or have a good idea of how to play pistol round from the CT perspective, it can pay off more than you might think. I'll give you 2 pistol round strats, one for A and one for B, as an idea of the theory of how to play the pistol round. So let's start with pistol theory. The nature of pistols means that numbers are king, whether it's T or CT side. Never get double peaked. Always try and peak as a group. On T side, lurking has little value and you really should just be moving with your team. On CT side, you obviously can't play with your team for the whole round because everyone has a different choke point that they're going to be responsible for. So CT pistol rounds end up being about positioning yourself to be able to take shots, then to safely retreat to another position where you can take some shots and then safely retreat to another position. And hopefully you'll get enough kills or delay enough time to win the round with your team. On T side, it really is about being so aggressive as a group that you overwhelm the CT side. Now for the T side pistol strats. Starting with the B side. Keep it simple and people will be able to do it. All you need to do is ask your team to go rush B. What you need to do is buy 2 flashbangs and a smoke for the CT Molotov. If you are in first, flash, pre-smoke, flash, job's done. It's simple, it's effective, it's a B rush. If you aren't first, you can either sit back and flash for your entry, dropping the smoke to someone in front of you, or you can just smoke and double flash as though you are in first, accepting that anyone in front of you might get blinded. Either is fine. For A site, tell your team to go shift palace, buy a smoke and 2 flashes. Smoke stairs immediately, then when your team get close to the end of palace, throw 2 flashes over palace. Just be careful to communicate that they're going to shift immediately to the end of palace, ready to rush as soon as they get to the entrance. Retakes and post plants. In this section I'll explain how to retake and how to play out post plants correctly, because whilst they are both really simple to play out theoretically, they're also some of the most misplayed parts of the game, starting with how to play out post plants. To keep things simple, let's start with what to do the instant the bomb goes down. And despite popular belief, the answer is not to run it down towards the CTs. When the bomb goes down, you need to assess the situation, identify the best place to play the post plant from, and beeline towards it. And a common mistake I see in this instant with worst players is not believing they have time to move, thinking the CT side will peek them any second, so they have to sit on the bomb and die there. This isn't true 9 out of 10 times, and the one time it is true, there won't be any question about it, because the CTs will have already made noise and be shooting at your position. So when the bomb goes down and you've moved into a good spot on the site, then you need to check your utility and make a plan on how you're going to use it. Maybe you're smoking off checkpoints, saving a molly for the bomb or using it to delay, saving a flash so you can pop flash when the CTs do get into sight. It doesn't really matter what the plan is. At this point, you just need to recognize what utility you do have and make a plan to use it. Don't die with it on your belt. Then you need to play out the round. So let's go through all the positions on A and B, offsite and inside, and how to play all of them. And don't worry, because the offsite positions play the same way, and there's only 2 real ways to play an inside position. So let's start with inside because it is simpler. Before we get into it, here's a graphic for all the spots on A, and one with all the spots on B, with the positions you should be playing post plants in. So an inside position is one of 2 things. It's either a double setup or a full hide spot, and they're both pretty self-explanatory. To play a double setup spot, it's either a contact or crossfire setup, and to play a full hide spot, you're waiting for the CTs to have to clear you, or trying to peek them when they're clearing a different spot. Now to play offsite is a little bit more complicated. Any offsite location you play should have vision of the bomb, and if it doesn't, then you're trying to play the enemy CT that you'll have enough time to shift all the way out and shoot them before they defuse. Which is really risky because if the CT reads that, you aren't in a position to stop them, they'll just stick the defuse, so I wouldn't really recommend it. So to play an offsite position, you aren't playing to delay or to stop the CTs from getting into the site. You're the round winner usually. Whereas an inside player is dying on the site or stopping the CTs, you're letting them in and you're playing the bomb. This is a really complicated 1v1 situation, so I can't really go over everything, but let's discuss it a bit. In a 1v1, if the CT player smokes the bomb, and trust me, good players always should be smoking the bomb, and then they tap the defuse, the T player playing offsite needs to peek and try to spray the smoke. And usually the CT will just watch for this and peek and kill the T. So to prevent that, you just have to be mechanically sharp, ready for the CT to skirt the edge of their own smoke and peek you. And there are a bunch more variations on how this situation can play out. So instead of going through them all, I'm going to correct a few obvious mistakes people make so we can move on. The first mistake is pros never fake. This saying, this damn saying, it is not true at all. Pros fake all the goddamn time, so you should be ready for a CT to peek you after that initial bomb tap. The second mistake is not knowing how to count. Yes, I am serious. Every time you hear, you should immediately be counting to 4 in your mind, and be making a plan with that in mind. Whether that plan is to jiggle immediately to bait shots and confirm they're not defusing, or to peek near the end of that count for the best and most delayed gunfight. Too many times have I seen players lose 1v1s because they did not bother to count. Final mistake is playing too scared. The shift key and its consequences have been unimaginably bad for the CS2 player base. Did you know that if you hold the shift key down when you peek someone, or when they're peeking you, you're more likely to lose the gunfight? Because slow targets are really easy to shoot. People shift way too much in 1v1s. They shift for so long that the CT's cleared everything other than the position they're standing in. So you might be masking noise, but they're already going to be looking at you, and you're just actively making your gunfight worse. If you are shifting, especially in 1v1s, have a good idea of why. Don't make it your default. Retakes. I won't go as deeply into how retakes work because it's pretty simple despite how poorly it is done, and I talked about it a bit in this video. So I'll just talk about Mirage specific retake advice. For the B site, a great piece of advice is to not be afraid to flank, because a lot of people default to going through market, when B site is unique in how fast you can jump to short or go under. And deciding when to do this is about the context of the round. If you think a flank is undefended, that's when you should attack it. Or if you think that you can overwhelm that defender by yourself, maybe you have a better gun. Next up is A site. Don't be afraid to get up close, because a mistake people make a lot on the A site when retaking is spending too much time around the stairs or connector area trying to take fights with the T side that are only really stalling. All that's happening when the CTs could just be running up like this, forcing the fights. Don't be afraid to aggressively clear site, CT, Tetris, ramp, or palace. Really get in there during an A retake, because you can fall into the trap of letting the T side run down the clock otherwise. Mainly due to the fact that the A site is just too big. To wrap up retakes, be aggressive, be brave, but be conscious of the time, and you can never play it too wrong. Executes. In this section, I'll explain how/when to execute A and B, the roles of everyone during an execute, and even how to pop or play contact into a site as well. So a default A execute looks something like this. Smoke off stairs, jungle, and CT. Flash lamp, flash deep into the site, Molotov under palace, clear the site, and plant default. Extremely simple. Now before I move on to the additional things you can do during an execute, or other ways it can play out, let's talk about the roles of all 5 players during an execute. And for simplification's sake, let's say this is an out of spawn call to do it at 1:35 on the clock. First up, the entry fragger. Watch this video. Done. Second up is the first trade fragger. Pretty simplistically, they try and stay right behind the first entry fragger and trade them out when they inevitably get their head blown off. Third, the second trade fragger. This guy's job is to hold the angles that the CTs might push as the entry fragger is clearing the site. On A site, bench is the most common place for CTs to push through, with secondary to that being the push through the ticket smoke on CT. And thirdly and most uncommonly being the push through stairs dropping into sandwich. So there is another way to play this role, and that's to be the hard fragger, where you don't care about anything other than kills. And this is usually done from Palace, where your job is to use your teammates to kill the enemy. It's a difficult role to articulate, but the main piece of advice I'll give is to never go in first, exclusively playing off your teammates' actions, and to play extremely stubborn about that point, otherwise you'll just end up giving away free kills to the enemy. Fourth is the support player. This is ideally an AWPer, but not necessarily. But they will be the one throwing the support utility, the flashes and some of the smokes. And after they've done that, they run in to do the same job as a second trade fragger. Or in a particularly abusive team, they can be the one to entry as well. But that's obviously not the ideal situation. Unfortunately though, the util needs to be thrown and the site needs to be entered into. So you might find yourself in a bad team throwing all the util, then having to run past your team only to die and watch your team trade you out to win the round. The final role might not be what you think. And I won't get too deep into the reasons for it, that will be obvious in a moment, because the final role is the Lurker. And don't get me wrong, I fully understand that if someone calls for an A execute and you go lurk middle, that you're going to get complained at if it doesn't work. But I'll put it like this. If 4 people couldn't take the A site, the 5th running through the exact same choke point would not have made a significant difference. And you can actually have a lot more impact on the outcome of a round by applying pressure from middle or by killing unsuspecting rotators. But like I said, not getting too deep into this topic because it's way too complicated to explain here. I just wanted people to understand that if your team is hitting a site, you often can have way more impact applying pressure elsewhere. So that's all the roles during a site execute explained. But before we move on to B site, pops, contacts, etc., I want to give you a few tips on how to make your executes more successful. The first is to understand that CS is going to be played imperfectly. So your team's not going to fulfill all the roles needed for a site execute. And quite honestly, the most common mistake during an A execute in Pugs is to throw util, get out Tetris, and everyone sits there. This is something that annoys me personally, because it is just baiting. And yeah, maybe the CTs will peek you, and yeah, you might win that fight, which you are disadvantaged in by the way, but it's just bad. Someone, for the love of God, just entry. And if no one wants to go in to trade you, or entry themselves, I would honestly just recommend leaving in that situation. Because if your team has no intention of taking the site, you'd be better off trying to fight and get a 1v1 elsewhere on the map, rather than having to fight this horde of CTs that are definitely rotating onto your site. A second thing that's important during an execute is the plant spot. People end up planting in the worst locations just because it's safe. You should look at where your team can play offsite in the post plant and plant for there. The smokes and utility you've thrown in an average execute should be enough to cover those plant spots. So plant intelligently once the site is clear and you have a teammate covering you. Otherwise just don't plant at all. Moving on to B site. A B site execute takes 3 smokes. Get right, get left, and market. As well as 2 molotovs, 1 for car and 1 for bench, as well as 4 flashes. 2 for the entry and 2 god flashes. But if done properly, it can be a lot more oppressive than the A site execute. The only thing that makes B site executes slightly more dangerous is that defensive smoke thrown by the B anchor. It makes Ts have to play much more closely as a team, as they really have to be ready to trade when the CT pops out of that smoke. Alternatively, you can nade the smoke during the execute, which makes this whole thing a lot easier, but the roles in a B execute are largely the same as before. So I'm going to quickly explain pops and contact plays, as well as when to call for them. Pops are when you get as close as possible to the entrance of a site, throw 1 flashbang and go. They get the name from that flash, because people will say pop the second their flash blinds the CT, which starts the site hit. And pops are great if you want to avoid fighting through large amounts of utility, because they limit the amount of time the CT has to retreat, and it can really punish CTs that play too close or are too isolated. It also limits the amount of time the CTs do have to rotate into the site. So these are great to call when you think there's only 1 CT on the site, or simply if you don't have the utility for a full site execute, which is even more so the case for contact hits. Contact site hits are when you make no noise, where ideally the first noise made is from an AK into the head of of a CT, hoping that you can shift close enough, clearing angles, and then taking a single gunfight which wins you the site. These are heavily punished by AWPers, CTs playing retake, or CTs that are deeply entrenched in off angles. This is because shifting into off angles or AWPs will get you killed, and a CT playing retake will mean that you won't get full control of a site. These work better on A site than B site because oftentimes there's a player in apps waiting for exactly this play. So to briefly explain the decision between executes, pops, and contact hits before moving on, it's based on map control, utility, and player numbers. Executes are good in high player numbers with lots of utility and don't require much map control. Pops are good in any amount of player numbers with minimal utility needed, only needing a flash, but generally require a lot of map control to mask the intent of the play. And finally, contact hits are good with no map control, util, or player numbers, because they let you take advantage of the lack of information caused by low player numbers on the map. Skill jumps, wallbangs, and boosts. This is every skill jump, wallbang, and boost you need to know on Mirage, starting with skill jumps, and don't worry, I'll explain how to do them easily. And the answer isn't practice for 100 hours in a KZ server. So first up is catwalk. The key to these jumps is lineups. And for this one, I come against this table, line up my crosshair here on the ground. When I reach this point, I jump and strafe towards the window, then I crouch jump again, and then it's done. It's not difficult once you've tried a few times, and you really just need to follow the lineup. The second skill jump is off of car into B apps, and this is another one that's easier than people think. Now if you want to jump it perfectly with no gaps, it can be quite difficult, which is why I just try not to do it perfectly. I line up my crosshair with this section of the door to jump onto the edge of the car. Then I allow my player model to push against the car, pressing W for a moment, then releasing as I crouch jump and strafe with D towards apps. I think the main difficulty comes from when people try and jump and instantly jump again after they land, when they really don't need to. Just take it a little bit slower and it becomes much more consistent. The final skill jump that's useful to competitive play is in window to ladder. I don't really have a lineup for this one, and it's easy enough that I hesitate to add it as a skill jump, but it's used so often that I thought I should at least mention it. I'll be honest, the rest of the skill jumps aren't really useful outside of extremely niche situations, so I'll leave those to movement players and move on to wallbangs. And before I go through all the wallbang lineups you need on Mirage, let's quickly talk about spamming in CS. Because knowing where to spam misses the key knowledge of when and how. And this applies to smokes as well as wallbangs, because it all falls under the category of spam. The number one thing about spamming is minimizing damage to yourself, because it is a two-way street. If an enemy sees a trail of bullets through a wall or smoke, they can either spam back with better knowledge than you, or just peek and kill you mid-spray. Secondly, if you spam all 30 bullets with your AK, a good player is going to hear that, and they might abuse the time you spend reloading to push and kill you easily. Now an easy trick to avoid getting killed like this, that might even net you a few kills, is to always leave 5 extra bullets in your mag, and watch for a push, and never spray your full mag. The last thing about spam is to just do it more. When I was first learning about Counter-Strike back in CSGO, I watched a simple demo, and the one thing I remember taking away from it was how often he spams. Now this was back in CSGO, so the AWP had 10 bullets, but the point remains. If you only have a 1% chance of killing someone every time you spam, the answer isn't only to look for better spam positions, it's also to spam more often. Within the limitations obviously of doing it safely and not wasting your entire ammo. You should be spamming a lot. Now here are all the wallbang spots on Mirage that you do need to know. Apps to short, under palace, connector, A site triple box from con, ticket to default plant, ticket in general, right side window, B apps, default, top mid boxes, left side of window, default on A, bench on B. Now I tried my best, but I might have missed some, but those are at least the main ones that I can think of. So finally are all the boosts I can think of. Triple, great for deagle or force buy rounds. Top mid, great to get AWP picks into the lower CT player who won't expect you. CT boost, great when retaking A and trying to get an opening into that round. Under, a great middle setup that can catch the T's off guard, just remember to smoke to your left. Window to ladder, a great way of getting into ladder when window's smoked. B site, leaving a shotgun or dualies player here and watching them catch 1 or 2 players off guard can be really valuable. B apps, this lets a CT get into B apps really quickly. Sure, this is a classic boost that people tend to expect a bit more these days, so just be careful when using it. But it is best for getting one and then retreating. So that's Mirage. Thank you so much for watching this long video. Please sub so YouTube can send me a play button eventually, and stick around if you want to hear me talk about my future plans and some behind the scenes stuff. The first thing though is that I need your help. I plan on making coaching videos where I review viewer submitted demos, so if you're interested in that, there's going to be a link in the description to a Google form where you can submit demos. But anyway, why did this video take so long? First problem was my own inadequacy. I'm really slow at video editing. I'm pretty bad at video production in general, so I ended up having to remake large sections of this video multiple times. And then I got my yearly deathly illness during the production, where I ended up doing nothing but sitting in my chair, listening to Horus Heresy audiobooks. And then finally, the last problem was this video is like 70 minutes long. That's like irresponsibly long to sit and make on my own. But with smaller videos on the horizon and simpler video formats planned, like the coaching I mentioned before, I don't think it's ever going to take this long to upload again. And if you're one of those 7,000 people who watched that AIM video I made before I took it down, you might wonder why I unlisted it. And the long and short of that one is I just wasn't happy with the quality. And thanks to the people who pointed out the problems with that video, it made me really think about what I want to do with my content. I'll probably remake it at some point in a different form, but for now I learned a lot of important lessons about it for what I want to do. So I'm just going to lay out my plan. Big videos like this one and the entry video are going to be constantly in production. They're going to be part of a series on the fundamentals of how to play CS, and there are only going to be like 20 of those, thereabouts, ever. And alongside that, I want to make coaching videos and maybe some other miscellaneous CS videos. And I've got more plans aside from that to do with content, maybe co-streaming, a podcast. I want to set up a Discord to organize community events where we can like maybe play some Pop Flash games, maybe even play some old CSGO games. But all those plans are a bit uncertain. For now, it's just coaching videos, big CS videos. That's my main focus. So that's my plan. Thanks so much for watching again. It is somewhat mind-blowing how nice some people can be about the content, even when I make bad content like the AIM video from before, and I really don't take it for granted. So I'll catch you in the next one.